I went back to my small hometown a few years ago, and I ended up walking through the cemetery where some of my relatives are buried. As I wandered around, I started seeing names I hadn't thought about in decades. Parents of childhood, friends, old neighbors, familiar faces from school or church. And as I looked at the gravestones, I found myself remembering things I didn't expect to. Their personalities, their homes, their cars, what their kids were like. I remembered going over to many of their houses when I was growing up. As I looked around, there was the grocery store owner. There was the woman who loved purple so much, she even had a purple Christmas tree. There was the man who wore clothes out of style for so long that they were back in style. And then there was the man who always kept his lawn perfectly manicured. The list goes on and on. Quirky humans just like me. As I stood there taking all of this in, I was in a deep contemplative state. I wasn't sad. Instead, I was awakening. It was like I was seeing all of this clearly for the first time. There was a whole social web of people who significantly impacted my childhood, and they were all gone. And then something hit me hard. All of these people who I'd known personally, their worries, fears, hopes, dreams, bank accounts, concerns about what other people thought of them, it was all in the past. Over, done, none of it mattered anymore. It wasn't a depressing thought, it was just clarifying. And it was one of several moments that finally broke through for me. The truth is, I spent a lot of years, decades really, living the way I thought I was supposed to, trying not to disappoint people, choosing paths that made sense on paper, decisions that were logical and practical to a fault. And for a long time, that worked well enough, or at least it looked like it did from the outside. But inside, I was getting more and more disconnected from who I really was. It took me years to realize that logic is a useful tool when making major life decisions, but it should be paired with honesty about who we really are and what's going to work for us. In my early 50s, things started to unravel. A long marriage ended. I went through some deeply stressful family situations. I left jobs that just didn't align with me anymore, or maybe never did. And for the first time, I had to really stop and look at the life I'd built and ask myself, is this actually me? The cemetery moment was part of that process. I stood there thinking about how these people had once had hopes and fears just like I did. They probably had moments of joy, regrets they never voiced, roles they played because they thought they had to. And now, all of that was gone. And I realized I didn't want to live the rest of my life playing a role. I didn't want to reach the end with people thinking they knew me when I hadn't even shown up as myself. I started looking back over the years and asking, what was I so afraid of? Why had I spent so much time worrying about what others thought, doing things I didn't want to do, avoiding the things I did? And even more importantly, what was I really risking by just being myself? The answer I kept coming back to was this. I was afraid to be truly myself. Not consciously maybe, but deep down, I was more concerned with not disappointing others than with living honestly. Part of the problem of becoming disconnected with our true selves for long enough is that we don't know who we are anymore. We know we're dissatisfied with life, but we may not understand why. Everything becomes harder than it needs to be. It requires brute force to soldier on when we're not really on our own path. I vowed not to live this way anymore. To be clear, I've never shied away from hard work or helping others. Life isn't always just about ourselves and what we feel like doing. But I realized if I'm not part of the equation, then there's less joy in life. There's more resentment and frustration. To the degree I can, I've got to align whatever time I've got left in my life with what brings me joy and meaning. I'm done saying yes to things I don't like and don't want to do. When I live congruently with who I really am, I've learned that I'm kinder and gentler, more at peace, more alive, more real. With humility and confidence, I can say, I deserve to live this way. And my loved ones deserve to get the real me. And you deserve this too. And if any part of this sounds familiar to you, if you've ever felt like you've been living someone else's life or just been quieting your real voice just to keep the peace, I know I've been there, I want you to know you're not alone. This isn't about throwing everything away. It's about finally letting your real self have a say. And if you're over 50 or just at a point where you're asking big questions, it's not too late. In fact, it might be the perfect time.